Mr. Schumer. Mr. Schumer, aye. Mr. Durbin. Mr. Durbin, aye.
Are there any senators wishing to vote or to change their vote? Seeing none on this vote, the yeas are 64, the nays are 27. The nomination is confirmed. Under the previous order, the motion to reconsider is considered made and laid upon the table. The President will immediately be notified of the Senate's action, and the Senate will resume legislative session.
Madam President.
The Senate will be in order. Senators, please take your conversations out of the chamber. The Senator from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I'll be brief. I rise today to speak about the Electronic Systems Center at Hanscom Air Force Base in Massachusetts and its role in our nation's cybersecurity. I want to clarify a situation we face as a nation. First, the Secretary of Defense has said loud and clear that the threat of cyber attacks on our country and the need for America to develop strong military cyber capabilities keeps him up at night. And I can tell you it keeps me up and many other people up as well.
The Senate will be in order.
Thank you, Madam President. As I said, the Secretary of Defense has said loud and clear that the threat of cyber attacks to our country keeps him up at night. Well, it keeps me up at night and many other people as well, because we've read about the cyber attacks by the Chinese. We've read about Iran. The Secretary has described it as an evolving and urgent threat in our future. Our nation's security depends on winning the battle in cyberspace. Unfortunately, the Air Force is in the midst of a force structure change that ignores crucial facts that I've just stated. At a time when cyber threats are growing more and more important each day, the Air Force is making questionable decisions that, in my opinion, creates unnecessary risk to our nation's cyber defenses and our ability to deal with those very threats. It makes absolutely no sense at this point in time. That's why just a few weeks ago, the House and Senate Armed Services Committees took strong action to prevent what the entire Massachusetts delegation felt was a premature proposal by the Air Force to reduce Hanscom's leadership from a 3-star general to a 2-star general. The elimination of the ESC commander position at Hanscom will diminish our cyber capabilities and focus across the entire force, and that is not a good thing at this point in time. That's the last thing we need in the midst of a cyber attack. In response, Representative Tsongas from Massachusetts inserted a provision in this year's National Defense Authorization Act that was passed by the full House of Representatives that required the Secretary of the Air Force to remain and to retain core functions at Hanscom as they existed on November 1st, 2011. Her language was aimed at retaining Hanscom's 3-star leadership. Similarly, I worked with Senator Lieberman and our Senate Armed Services Committee to include language in the Senate Armed Services markup, reported version of the Defense Authorization Bill that directs the Air Force to keep in place the current leadership rank structure until the two defense committees have an opportunity to review the recommendations of the National Commission on Structure of the Air Force. Given Secretary Panetta's warning, I believe we must pay particular attention to any changes that relate to cybersecurity. The Massachusetts delegation has been united in declaring that both Hanscom's mission and the senior leadership should be preserved in order to bring forth the best cyber capabilities our country has to offer. Both defense committees have spoken with one voice to the Air Force. Stand down with this change until both committees receive more information about how the proposed force structure will affect cybersecurity. I also want to explain why the delegation feels so strongly about this. Massachusetts has been a national security and information technology leader for many decades. Groundbreaking innovation in cybersecurity is taking place in Massachusetts as we speak, perhaps more than any other state in our entire nation. That innovation is happening at Hanscom, at universities like the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. In our defense sector, our capabilities are second to none. The Electronic Systems Center at Hanscom has unlimited potential to take on future missions and future threats in the realm of cybersecurity. The Air Force and the MIT Lincoln Labs are now upgrading their partnership to enhance our nation's ability to meet key and growing cyber requirements. The Department of Defense and the Air Force continues to depend on Hanscom's unmatched cyber expertise. To ensure our nation's crucial cyber defenses, I say again very firmly today that the Air Force must preserve the senior three-star leadership in Massachusetts. Madam President, it just does not make sense for our military cyber leadership, expertise, and talent to be based in a location where some of the world's most leading research and technological development is actually taking place. Makes no sense. Placing Hanscom's cyber team under a chain of command with a three-star general in another state with a number of other Air Force responsibilities diminishes our nation's ability to deliver critical cyber tools and resources and impacts our ability to respond to ever-growing cyber threat. Congress has spoken in a bipartisan and bicameral way. We have stated our position clearly. The Air Force should not move forward with any force structure changes at Hanscom until Congress has had an opportunity to review what our appropriate force structure mix should be, particularly as it relates to cybersecurity. We absolutely, positively must be ready to meet this next generation threat, the one that keeps Secretary Panetta up at night. And I will continue to fight to make sure that we are prepared. I thank the Chair and yield the floor.
The Senator from Ohio.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise today. I ask unanimous consent to speak as if in morning business for up to 5.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise today in support of a resolution I'm co-sponsoring to commemorate Juneteenth Independence Day. In just 2 weeks, Americans will gather, of course, as we know, to celebrate the 4th of July. But it's important to remember that when our nation gained its independence, there were some 450,000 enslaved people in the 13 states. It wasn't until June 19, 1865, more than 2 years after President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which liberated a limited number of people, that enslaved people on June 19, 1865 in the southwestern states finally learned of their freedom. Months after the 13th Amendment was ratified, Army Major General Gordon Granger and federal troops arrived in Galveston, Texas, to enforce emancipation. Since then, Americans in Texas and throughout the United States have celebrated Juneteenth, which is the oldest known celebration of the end of slavery in our country. To celebrate that day, people in my state, from all backgrounds, not African Americans only, not only descendants of slaves, but people of all backgrounds and ethnicities will gather at special places all over Ohio, at Franklin Park in Columbus, our state capital, at the Coming of Emancipation Memorial Service in Oberlin, just a few miles from my house, the site in Oberlin of visits from Martin Luther King, the site in Oberlin of the Underground Railroad where slaves escaping slavery were housed on their way to Canada. Ohioans will reflect in Westwood Cemetery in Oberlin, where former slaves and famous abolitionists are buried. At Cincinnati's Juneteenth Festival in Eden Park, families and visitors will gather on one of the hilltops overlooking the Ohio River, which slaves saw coming from Kentucky into freedom as they crossed the river into the north. They remember the perilous journey to freedom that many made at the banks of that river. In Wilberforce, in Wilberforce, an African-American school, higher university in southwest Ohio. In Wilberforce, in Zanesville, and Newcomerstown in Cleveland, Ohioans will hold ceremonies of remembrance and celebration. On Juneteenth, Independence Day especially, we have yet another opportunity to celebrate our great democratic traditions, our American ingenuity and innovation and imagination. We celebrate the rich heritage and vibrant culture of all Americans who are descendants of enslaved people on American soil. We celebrate the ingenuity of Ohioans like Columbus native Granville T. Woods, who invented the telegraph device that sent messages between moving trains and train stations. We celebrate the innovation of Ohioans like Garrett Morgan, a Clevelander who invented the traffic light. We celebrate the imagination and wisdom of Ohioans like Nobel's Prize-winning and recent Presidential Medal of Freedom honoree Toni Morrison of Lorain, Ohio. In America, progress is never promised, but through the work of dedicated citizens, we move closer to being the nation our framers envisioned. We can work together toward achieving a more perfect union where justice isn't limited to the powerful, but is also accessible to the people. Today, I'm proud to commemorate Juneteenth, Independence Day. Madam President, I yield the floor.
The senator from Oklahoma.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that I be recognized as in morning business for up to 15 minutes.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. As you know, the Senate will take up a vote this week on the CRA that I have offered concerning utility MAC. Utility MAC is a requirement. MAC, of course, M-A-C-T means maximum achievable control technology. And one of the problems we're having with the overregulation that we have on a lot of these emissions is that there is no technology to accommodate this. Well, in the case of utility MAC, I think everyone understands now this is an effort to kill coal. And I know there are a lot of reasons people have on this, but recently some things have happened, and I thought I would mention that as we look toward this vote, it looks like it's going to be on Wednesday. Looks like it's going to be some speaking time on Tuesday, and on Wednesday then we'll actually have the vote. As we all know, a CRA is an effort for the elected officials to reflect upon the overregulations and to stop a regulation. I mean, after all, we're the ones who are accountable to the people and not the Environmental Protection Agency. The breaking news is that President Obama just issued a statement this afternoon that he will veto my resolution if it passes. Just before that announcement from the White House this afternoon, Representatives Ed Markey and Henry Waxman came out fighting with a new report detailing what Representative Waxman has called the most anti-environmental House of Representatives in history. I'd like to remind my Democrat friends that 19 House Democrats supported the companion legislation in the House, the same thing that we'll be voting on here. The Democrats and a lot of the many of the labor unions have sent letters in support of my resolution, so it's not just Republicans whose constituents are feeling the pain of the EPA's regulations. Now, to my Democrat friends in the House, I beg to differ. It's not that this Congress is anti-environmental. It's that the EPA is the most radical EPA in history, aggressive to the point that even the left-leaning Washington Post has called out the agency for, quote, earning a reputation for abuse. Of course, this is the same EPA whose top officials have told us that they are out to crucify the American energy producers. We all remember that. The sixth area of the EPA, Armendariz, came out and made this statement to some of his subordinates that we need to do the same thing that the Romans did back, you remember that, they did back in the old days when they'd go around the Mediterranean and they'd go into the towns in Turkey and they'd crucify the first 5 people that they would see, and that gets them under their control. And he said that's the same thing. That's what we have to do. That's going to be our operation. Well, we went through that, and of course he's no longer there. Over the course of President Obama's presidency, whatever they could achieve through legislation, they've tried to achieve through aggressive, onerous EPA regulations. They tried, first of all, to do it through legislation. Remember cap-and-trade legislation? They tried for 10 years to get that done. Finally, each year they brought it up. More and more people in this body, the United States Senate, were opposed to a cap-and-trade system to do away with greenhouse gases and to put regulations on them. Well, every time a vote comes up, there's a larger majority opposed to it because the people of this country are concerned about the economy and the fact that this would be a very costly thing. It was Obama that made President Obama said with the cap-and-trade regulations, it would be very, very, very expensive. Now, when they couldn't pass the Clean Water Restoration Act, the same thing happened. Remember, that was introduced by Senator Feingold from Wisconsin and by Representative Oberstar in the House. and they not only did they defeat overwhelmingly the Clean Water Restoration Act, but the two individuals who were the sponsors in the House and the Senate were both defeated in the next election. So just how radical is President Obama on environmental issues? By imposing these backdoor global warming cap-and-trade regulations through the EPA, President Obama is fulfilling his campaign promise that energy prices would necessarily skyrocket, his words, by vetoing the Keystone Pipeline. He gave the far left what one of his supporters called the biggest global warming victory in years. By finalizing the most expensive EPA rule in history, he is making good on his campaign promise that if anybody wants to build a coal-fired power plant, they can. It's just that it will bankrupt them. And he succeeded in throwing hundreds of millions of taxpayers' dollars out the window on companies like Solyndra, which he said would lead us to a brighter and more prosperous future. But President Obama is not running on this record of accomplishments. Why? Because Americans are worse off, not better off for it. They are out of work, they're struggling to make ends meet, and under the pain of regulations that cause their energy prices to skyrocket. So he's running as far away from that radical record as possible. So what are we trying to do in the Senate by stopping Utility MAC? Is to prevent the President from achieving under another aspect of his radical global warming agenda, and hopefully restore some sanity and balance to this out-of-control regulatory regime. I think everyone in this body can agree that we all share a commitment for improving air quality, but it should be done in a way that doesn't harm jobs and the economy and cause electricity prices to skyrocket on every American or do away with one of the most reliable, abundant, affordable energy resources, coal. You've got to keep in mind that right now, in order to run this machine called America, 50% of that is actually being done on coal. Now, I'd like to address the public health debate, which has long been the excuse for those in this administration who simply want to kill coal. It was certainly the excuse President Obama used today to defend his decision to veto my resolution. Let's be clear about one thing. One thing from the offset. If the effort behind Utility MAC were really about public health, then my Democrat colleagues would have joined our efforts way back in 2005 and passed the Clear Skies bill, a bill that would have put a plan in place to achieve a 70% reduction in mercury emissions. But they didn't. And we all remember why. We remember that they wanted to include in this bill that covered SOx, NOx, and mercury, the real pollutants, a mandatory 70% reduction. And they said, well, you can't do it because you don't also have CO2, anthropogenic gases that are covered by this bill. So it was held hostage, and consequently, we weren't able to get it passed. I can remember that President Obama said, and this is a quote, he said, I voted against the Clear Skies bill, quote, I voted against the Clear Skies bill. In fact, I was the deciding vote despite the fact that I'm a coal state and that half of my state thought I'd thoroughly betrayed them because I thought clean air was critical and global warming was critical, unquote. At that Environment and Public Works hearing in April of this year, Senator Barrasso asked Brenda Archambault of the National Wildlife Federation if the American people would have been better off if the Senate had passed the Clear Skies bill back in 2005. And her answer was absolutely. Of course, the National Wildlife Federation was not happy with it, that we were calling attention to Ms. Archambault's admission, so over the weekend they accused my staff of twisting her words. My staff did nothing of the sort. Not only did Ms. Archambault say that mercury reductions in 2005 would absolutely have made Americans better off, she reiterated that that same point later when Senator Barrasso asked her again, quote, it would have been better if they had done it in 2005, Ms. Archambault replied, sure. The entire exchange from the hearing has been posted on our EPW website for anyone who wants to see exactly what was said. And I don't think it gets any clearer than that. Common sense reductions earlier would have made us better off. That was 2005. that we would have had these reductions, mandatory reductions, in a very short period of time, and that time is more than 50% expired at this time. In the National Wildlife Federation blog, accusing me of twisting Ms. Archambault's words, the author says, quote, an odd part of Senator Inhofe's attack, he's essentially saying a 70% reduction in mercury emissions would have been just dandy, but the 91% reduction proposed by the EPA would destroy the economy. Is that really such a huge difference, or is he just playing politics with public health? That's a good question. What is the difference between the Clear Skies and the Utility MAC? It's very simple. Clear Skies would have reduced emissions dramatically by 70%. Now, we're talking about reducing emissions on SOx, NOx, and mercury. But it would have done it without threatening to kill coal and the millions of jobs that coal sustains. On the other hand, Utility MAC is specifically designed to kill coal. It makes no effort whatsoever to balance environmental protection and economic growth. Now, who's playing politics with public health? If public health were really the priority, why did President Obama and his fellow Democrats vote against a 70% reduction way back in 2005? Now, what is this effort really about? It's about one thing, killing coal. And killing coal is the centerpiece of their radical global warming agenda. Remember then, Senator Obama said that he voted against the health benefits in Clear Skies because he thought, quote, a global warming was critical. In other words, global warming was more important than any of the considerations regarding health. And these are real pollutants, SOx, NOx, and mercury. Importantly, the Senate will take this vote on my resolution just as the world leaders are gathering in Rio de Janeiro. Right now, they're down there gathering at the Rio +20 Sustainable Development Conference. Now, let's remember what happened 20 years ago, 1992. That was the conference in Rio where they all got together and they were going to be doing all these things on anthropogenic gases and all of that. Well, President Obama, who is now busy pretending to be a fossil fuel president to garner votes, will not be attending. But he is sending his green team to negotiate on his behalf. What is this conference really about? As Fox News reported back in April, quote, the main goal of the much-touted Rio +20 United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development is to make dramatic and enormously expensive changes in a way that the world does nearly everything, or as one of the documents put it, a fundamental shift in the way we think and act. Utility MAC is a huge part of this effort to change the way we live and to spread the wealth around. And that's what they're talking about down there. We start invoking a new tax system. It was Secretary General of the UN, Ban Ki-moon. He proposes how sustainable development changes can and must be addressed. He included, now I'm quoting him, more than a $2.1 trillion a year in wealth transfers from rich countries to poorer countries in the name of fostering green infrastructure, climate adaptation, and other green economy measures. He's advocating new carbon taxes. That's on us, of industrialized countries that could cost about $250 billion a year, or a 0.6% of gross domestic product by 2020. Other environmental taxes are mentioned but not specified. Further, unspecified price hikes that extend beyond fossil fuels to anything derived from agriculture, fisheries, forestry, or other kinds of land and water use, all of which would be radically reorganized. These changes would contribute to a more level playing field between the established and the brown technologies and newer, greener ones. He advocated major global social spending programs, including a social protection floor and social safety nets for the world's most vulnerable and social groups. What it's all talking about more higher taxes on the developed world to go to the beneficiary of the undeveloped world. This is the same thing they were talking about 20 years ago. So I think that it's very timely that this is happening today. It's happening at the very moment that we'll be voting on Wednesday as to whether or not to kill coal. And by the way, this is the only vote that will be taken this year, or probably ever, to ultimately kill coal. Once this is passed, then, of course, the contracts all are broken, and we have to figure out what are we going to do in this country if you kill coal. How do you run this machine called America? And the answer to that question is you can't do it. So it's very, very important, and I hope that I don't think there's any doubt in anyone's mind that the real purpose for the vote that would take place on Wednesday is going to be to kill coal in America. America can't provide the necessary energy to run its machine and be competitive without coal. So it's a critical vote, and it's one that I think people are aware of that is going to be taking place. With that, I yield the floor. I suggest absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Gaga.
President,
The senator from Illinois,
I ask consent the quorum call be suspended.
without objection.
Madam President, more than 2 centuries ago, in the Declaration of Independence, our founding fathers wrote that all men are created equal. America has sometimes fallen short of that ideal, but the history of our country has been a slow march toward equality for all. We have seen presidents play a key role in expanding freedom and equality. Who can forget Harry Truman's desegregation of the military, which set the stage for a Supreme Court decision in a civil rights era that has literally changed the face of America. Last Friday was another case in point. President Barack Obama declared that his administration will no longer deport immigrant students who grew up in America. This action will give these young immigrants the chance to come out of the shadows and be part of the only country they've ever called home. With that decisive executive decision, America took another step toward fulfilling the Founders' promise of justice for all. Madam President, it's been 11 years since I first introduced the DREAM Act, legislation that would allow a select group of immigrant students with real potential to contribute more fully to America. The DREAM Act would give these students a chance to earn citizenship if they came to the United States as children, they've been long-term U.S. residents, they have good moral character, graduate from high school, and either complete 2 years of military service or 2 years of college. The DREAM Act has a history of broad bipartisan support. When I first introduced it, Senator Orrin Hatch, Republican of Utah, was my lead co-sponsor. In fact, we had kind of a head-to-head. Who was going to be the first name, Hatch or Durbin? Since the Republicans were in the majority, I bowed toward Senator Hatch. In 2006, when the Republicans last controlled this Congress, the DREAM Act passed the Senate as part of comprehensive immigration reform on a 62-36 vote with 23 Republicans voting for the DREAM Act. Unfortunately, the Republicans and leaders in the House refused to even consider the bill. Republican support for the DREAM Act, unfortunately, has been diminishing over the years. The last time the DREAM Act was considered in Congress, the bill passed the House under the leadership of Congressman Luis Gutierrez of Illinois and received a strong majority vote in the Senate. But only 8 Republican House members and 3 Republican senators voted for the bill. What a change in such a short period of time. Let's be clear, the only reason the DREAM Act is not the law of the land in America is because that we consistently face a Republican filibuster whenever we bring up this bill. The vast majority of Democrats continue to support the DREAM Act, but the reality is that it can't pass without support from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. That's why I've always said I am open to sitting down with anyone, Republican or Democrat, who is interested in working in good faith to solve this problem. I am personally committed to passing the DREAM Act, no matter how long it takes. But the young people who would be eligible for the DREAM Act can't wait any longer for Congress to act. Many have been deported from the only country they have ever known, America. They've been sent off to countries that they don't remember with languages they don't speak. Those who are still here are growing older, and when they graduate from college, they're stuck, unable to work, unable to contribute to the only country they know. That's why President Obama, using his presidential authority, did such an important thing to help these immigrant students. The President granted them a form of relief known as deferred action, which puts a hold on their deportation and allows them, on a temporary, renewable basis, to live and work legally in America. Madam President, that was the right thing to do. These students grew up here pledging allegiance to our flag and singing the only national anthem they know. They were Americans in their hearts and in their minds. They did not make the decision to come to this country. Their parents did. As Homeland Security Secretary Janet Napolitano said last Friday, immigrants who were brought here illegally as children lacked any intent to violate the law. And it is not the American way to punish children for their parents' actions. We don't do that in any aspect of the law in this country. Why would we do it here? Now, there will always be critics when the President uses his power, as he did last Friday. In fact, some members of Congress attacked President Truman when he ordered the desegregation of America's military. They said that Truman's order would hurt the military. Many even claimed that Truman had performed an illegal act as president. Today, many of the naysayers in this generation claim that halting the deportation of DREAM Act students will hurt the economy, and it too may be illegal. President Truman's critics were wrong, and so are President Obama's. President Obama's new deportation policy will make America a stronger nation by giving these talented immigrants Madam President, I ask for order in the chamber, please.
May we have order, Senators? Thank you. Senator from Illinois.
President Obama's new deportation policy will make America a stronger nation by giving these talented immigrants the chance to contribute more fully to our economy. Studies have found that these young people could contribute literally trillions of dollars to the U.S. economy during their working lives. They'll be the doctors and engineers, the soldiers, the teachers who will make us a stronger nation. Why would we waste that talent? These are young people who have been trained and educated in the United States. We have invested in these people. Let us at least see the fruits of this investment, the benefits that can come to America. Let's be clear. What the Obama administration has done in establishing this new process for prioritizing deportations is perfectly appropriate and legal. Throughout our history, the government has decided who to prosecute, who not to prosecute, based on law enforcement priorities and resources. The Supreme Court has held, and I quote, "An agency's decision not to prosecute is a decision generally committed to an agency's absolute discretion," end of quote. President Obama granted deferred action, to use the technical term, to DREAM Act students. Past administrations, Democrat and Republican, have used deferred action to stop deportations of low-priority cases. Last month, 90 immigration law professors sent a letter to the President arguing the executive branch has clear executive authority to grant deferred action to DREAM Act students. The letter explains the executive branch has granted deferred action since at least 1971, and that federal courts have recognized this authority since at least the mid-1970s. These immigration experts have also noted that there are a number of precedents for granting deferred action to individuals like the DREAM Act students. The President's action is not just legal, it's also a realistic approach to enforcing our immigration laws. Today, there are millions of undocumented immigrants in the United States, and it would literally take billions of dollars to deport them, as a handful of politicians have called for. So the Department of Homeland Security has to set priorities about which people to deport, which not to deport. The Obama administration has established a policy that makes it a high priority to deport those who have committed serious crime or any threat to public safety. I totally support that approach. And President Obama has said we won't use our limited resources to deport DREAM Act students. Now, some of my colleagues on the other side have claimed that this is a backdoor amnesty. That isn't even close to being true. This is simply a decision to focus limited government resources on serious criminals and other public safety threats. DREAM Act students will not receive permanent legal status or citizenship under the President's order. This policy has strong bipartisan support in Congress. I want to say a special word about one of my colleagues. 2 years ago, Indiana Republican Senator Richard Lugar joined me crossing the aisle to ask the Department of Homeland Security to grant this deferred action. I called him on Friday, and I said, "Dick, I just want to tell you how much I respect you. It took us 2 years, but we got it done." He was the only senator from the other side of the aisle with the courage to step up and join me in that letter. He may have paid some price for it, though he denied it in the phone conversation. But I can't tell you how much I respect the man for his courage in asking for this. It took 2 years, but those students who are appreciative of the President's action should not forget the singular courage of the senator from Indiana. Last year, when Senator Lugar and I sent a renewed request, 21 senators joined us, including Majority Leader Harry Reid, Judiciary Committee Chairman Patrick Leahy, and of course Senator Bob Menendez, who heads up the Hispanic caucus in the Senate. Now, it's easy to criticize the President's new deportation policy when it's abstract and we're talking about constitutional legal theory and deferred action and so forth. But I think what has brought this debate to where it stands today is the real stories, the stories of these young people. I've tried almost every week to come to the floor to tell a DREAM Act story. Today, I want to tell you one more. It's a story about Manny Barch. Manny was born in Germany. He was abused and neglected by his parents, so his grandmother became his guardian. After Manny's grandfather passed away, his grandmother married an American soldier. When Manny was 7 years old, sadly, his grandmother was tragically killed by a drunk driver. His step-grandmother decided to return to America and brought Manny with him. Step-grandfather brought Manny with him. They moved to Gilboa, a small town in Ohio. Unfortunately, Manny's step-grandfather, wanting to protect him, failed to file any papers for Manny. When Manny grew up in Ohio, he went to elementary school and high school. Preparing to apply for college, he learned he didn't have any legal status in America. But he wanted to do the right thing, so he made an appointment with Immigration Services to clear things up. When he showed up for his appointment, Manny was arrested and detained. He was 17 years old. Here's what Manny said about the prospect of being deported to Germany, a country he left as a little boy. "I don't know anybody over there. This is my home. This is where everybody I know lives. And to think about leaving, I just wouldn't be able to imagine it." Manny's friends and families rallied behind him, asking for his deportation to be at least temporarily suspended. Thanks to community support, he was ultimately allowed to stay. He went to college at Heidelberg and Tiffin, Ohio. Last month, Manny graduated with a major in political science and minor in history. He was president of his fraternity and active in community service. For the last 4 years, he's organized a fundraiser to purchase Christmas gifts for kids with cancer at the Cleveland Clinic. Here's what he said about his future. "I would go through any channel I have to correct this situation. I'm not asking for citizenship, but I would love to earn it if that possibility would arise. I'd love to contribute to this country and give back to it. I just don't understand why they would educate people in my situation and then deport them back to other countries who will reap the benefits of our American education." David Hogan is chairman of the history department at Heidelberg University. Here's what he says about Manny Barch. "We want good people in this country. We want honest, hardworking people, and that's Manny, pure and simple. He's in the top 2% of students in terms of brilliance, work ethic, and personal qualities." Well, thanks to President Obama's executive order last Friday, Manny Barch and other DREAM Act students will be able to continue to live and work legally in America. Now, I asked the critics of that policy, would we be better off if we deported Manny back to Germany, a country he left when he was a little boy? Of course not. He grew up in America. He doesn't have any criminal background. He's no threat to our country. He'll make America stronger if we just give him a chance. Manny isn't just one example. There are a lot more, literally hundreds, if not thousands, of others just like him. When the history of civil rights in this century, the 21st century, is written, President Obama's decision to grant deferred action to DREAM Act students will be a key chapter. But it's also clear that it's only a temporary solution. It doesn't absolve Congress, the Senate and the House, from rolling up its sleeves and tackling this difficult but critically important issue in the matter of justice as well as the future of our economy. This is still our burden and our responsibility. Madam President, it was 2 years ago when I sent this letter, co-signed with Senator Lugar, to the President. I'm sorry it took 2 years, but I am grateful that there was a President who read it and listened and had the courage to act. His courage in standing up for these young people will make us a better nation. And equally important, it will bend that arc toward justice again. At the end of the day, these young people will make the case for why this was the right thing to do. I have no doubt in my mind that when the balance sheet comes in on these DREAM Act students, we're going to say, thank goodness, they were given a chance to make America a better nation. I want to personally salute the President for his leadership. This was an extraordinary, as I said, historic humanitarian moment. It has changed the debate in America about immigration, and it's given these young people a chance. I called one of those students on Friday, Gabby Pacheco. She's the best. She walked from Florida to Washington to dramatize the DREAM Act. She came out publicly and said, I'm undocumented, and I'm going to stand up for those in similar situation. She was crying on the phone. She just heard about it. And she said, I'm afraid. I'm afraid that these students will come forward, they'll admit they're undocumented, and someday some Congress, some president will use it against them and deport them. And I said, Gabby, I don't think so. Once these young people stand up and say, we're going to follow the law, we're going to do what we're told to do, we're going to put our names down and tell you who we are, anyone who tries to use that against them is going to suffer a terrific backlash across America. Because average American people will come to know these young people, respect them, honor what they bring to this nation, and realize that we'll be a better nation because of them. Madam President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll. Mr. Acapio.
Today in the Senate, work continued on the Farm Bill.